Did you know that Max Verstappen's Red Bull underwent McLaren-inspired changes just before his victory at Imola? The incredible thing is that these tweaks could be the key to staying in the championship fight. Let me know in the comments, do you think Verstappen would win without these upgrades? So, how much did the RB21 really influence this victory? In this video, we'll break down how the RB21's technical improvements played a decisive role in Max Verstappen's victory at the 2025 Emilia-Romagna GP. We'll discuss aerodynamics, strategies, and what this means for the future of F1. To truly understand the significance of Max Verstappen's victory at the 2025 Imola Grand Prix, we must look far beyond the final result. At first glance, we might think it was just another race win for one of the most dominant drivers in recent years. But the truth is that this victory wasn't simply a product of the momentum of a strong season or Verstappen's individual talent, but rather the precise moment when Red Bull was under technical and strategic pressure. In the weeks leading up to Imola, both McLaren and Mercedes had made significant improvements that began to dangerously close the gap Red Bull had built over the previous year. McLaren, in particular, was emerging as a team that was not only fast but also consistent, with Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris increasingly entering the direct fight with Verstappen. And that consistency, which until recently seemed like a long-term threat, began to manifest itself as an immediate risk. The Imola GP, moreover, is not just any race. It's a track that demands absolute precision in every corner, with extremely high downforce across much of the circuit and only one real clear overtaking opportunity on the entire lap. Meaning, any mistake in qualifying, the slightest loss of pace, or poorly executed strategy can cost you the entire race. And for Red Bull, arriving at this stage, knowing that McLaren had a more agile car in slow corners represented a very serious technical challenge. Up until that point, the RB21 had shown signs of weakness in these types of conditions, especially in scenarios where aerodynamic efficiency and traction in tight corners are essential. In Miami, for example, Verstappen had struggled to maintain pace in the closing laps due to high rear tire degradation, which set off several alarm bells within the team. Therefore, the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix was not just another race on the calendar. It was a test to measure whether the improvements applied to the RB21 could reverse a trend that was beginning to tilt dangerously in favor of its rivals. Furthermore, the narrative that had been building off the track didn't help calm the waters. At the media and paddock levels, talk of a possible team change for Verstappen, Red Bull's future without the advantage of 2024, and the growing threat of a championship-hungry McLaren added an extra layer of tension that couldn't be ignored. Max wasn't simply arriving as the favorite. He was arriving as the man who had to confirm whether he could still make a difference when his car was no longer clearly superior. And that's what makes this race so relevant in analyzing the season. Because here, more than at other circuits, it wasn't just about having a good car or knowing how to manage the pace. It was about proving, in demanding technical conditions and under media pressure, that Red Bull still had cards to play, and that Verstappen was still the driver capable of raising his team's level when it needed it most. With all this context in mind, it's clear that the victory at Imola was much more than just a combination of fast laps and well-executed pit stops. It was the result of a coordinated response between engineering and driving, designed to respond to a key moment in the championship. But to understand how that balance was achieved, we need to go into detail about the modifications the RB21 underwent just before this race, and how those technical decisions radically changed the car's handling on the road. The improvements Red Bull implemented on the RB21 ahead of the Imola Grand Prix weren't simply minor tweaks or improvised decisions. It was a profound, surgical, and highly strategic intervention, developed specifically to recover lost performance at the circuits where McLaren was beginning to set the pace. To understand the magnitude of what Red Bull brought to Imola, one must analyze the type of modifications they made and, above all, why they made them at that particular point in the championship. The pressure was real. The team knew that continuing with the configuration they used in previous races like Miami meant risking losing the technical leadership that had characterized them in past seasons. The response was a package of updates designed down to the last millimeter for Imola, a circuit where 70% of the layout demands extremely high levels of downforce, stability under braking, efficient traction under acceleration, And in addition, a balance that allows for rapid changes of direction without losing grip. And that's precisely where the engineer's hand was evident. One of the most visible and undoubtedly most talked about modifications was the complete reconfiguration of the RB21 sidepods. This area, which plays a key role in channeling airflow to the rear of the car and the rear, received a redesign clearly inspired by the approach McLaren adopted on its MCL38. Red Bull introduced what is technically called an integrated mid-wing design, which modifies the way air flows around the car, allowing for better intake of the diffuser and reducing turbulence in critical areas. This new design not only relocated the air intake to a further rearward position, but also slimmed it down, reducing its width to prioritize a cleaner and more efficient flow. The result was immediate: greater stability in fast corners, and a car that breathed better aerodynamically on the highly demanding sections of the circuit. But the innovations didn't stop there. Beneath the air intake of the new sidepods, a small but significant curved fin was incorporated, designed to generate controlled vortices. This piece, despite its modest size, served a critical function, keeping the airflow adhered to the upper surface of a subfloor, especially in areas where the car traverses corners with high lateral loads. According to technical analysis by specialists such as Gary Anderson, this type of fin is key to preventing flow separation, a phenomenon that significantly reduces the effectiveness of Venturi tunnels, especially in designs that opt for aggressive geometry. In short, what Red Bull was doing was not just tweaking the car's bodywork, but reinventing the way the RB21 behaved dynamically in sections where aerodynamics make the difference between winning and being overtaken. Another vital component of this package of improvements was the flat bottom, an area often overlooked by many fans, but which in modern Formula One represents the true core of aerodynamic performance. Red Bull had already introduced an initial version of this updated flat floor at the Miami Grand Prix, but at Imola they returned with specific modifications to the Venturi channels and rear diffuser. Specifically, the channels were narrowed in their midsection, which accelerated the passage of air under the car, thus maximizing ground effect and increasing downforce without increasing drag. At the same time, the rear diffuser received a step design with additional vertical elements, the purpose of which was to stabilize the car's rear wake and reduce induced drag. This not only allowed the RB21 to be faster on the straights, but also helped solve one of the most persistent problems Verstappen had been reporting: understeer in medium-speed corners. And if we're talking about efficiency, we can't overlook the adjustments to the rear suspension system and brake cooling. Red Bull redesigned the suspension fairings with a more aerodynamic shape, seeking to minimize the turbulence generated in that area, especially when negotiating fast corners like Piratella and Akminerali. At the same time, the air inlets for the rear brakes were modified to be narrower, a decision that might seem risky in terms of cooling, but was designed to maintain a cleaner flow to the rear wing, improving overall efficiency without compromising the operating temperature of the brakes. Christian Horner made it clear at the end of the race: these small decisions were what allowed the tires to remain in their optimal window throughout the race, especially during the long stints when the RB21 typically suffered high degradation. The important thing here is not just the number of improvements, but the coherence of the whole. Each of these modifications was designed to work in synergy with the others, creating a more balanced, more stable, and above all, more competitive car on a circuit as technical as Imola. What Red Bull demonstrated in this race is that it still possesses extraordinary responsiveness. When the rest of the paddock was beginning to doubt its supremacy, the team responded with a series of precise technical decisions that gave Verstappen back the tool he needed to compete at the highest level. But of course, an improved car doesn't win races on its own. It takes someone to push it to the limit, to understand every nuance, every adjustment, every sensation on the steering wheel. How Max Verstappen knew how to take full advantage of these improvements, making the difference right where others fail. Because a machine can be efficient, but only a driver with vision and precision turns that efficiency into real victory. Having a technically superior or strategically optimized car doesn't guarantee victory. Formula One, however dependent on engineering, remains a sport where the human factor can definitively tip the balance. And at Imola 2025, Max Verstappen wasn't simply a privileged passenger inside the RB21. He was the catalyst that transformed a series of technical improvements into a high-caliber victory. His performance wasn't limited to taking advantage of a competitive car. It was a demonstration of composure, tactical intelligence, extreme precision, and absolute understanding of the environment in which he competes. Verstappen read the race with astonishing clarity, making key decisions in moments of extreme pressure. His every move was an affirmation that, even in an increasingly balanced field, he remains one of the most complete and decisive drivers of his generation. One of the moments that made the difference was undoubtedly the start. Imola is a circuit where overtaking is extremely difficult. It barely has a clear overtaking zone, and the margin for error is minimal. For this reason, the start is one of the critical points of the weekend. And it was precisely there that Verstappen once again demonstrated why he is a world-class driver. Starting from second place, he executed a double overtake that has already been described by several analysts as one of the most audacious of the year. At the Tamburello corner, he found just enough space on the outside to simultaneously overtake Oscar Piastri and George Russell, two drivers who don't usually give away ground. This move wasn't an act of impulsive aggression, but rather a calculated move based on a perfect reading of the available grip, the traction of the RB21, and the behavior of the rivals. Christian Horner described it as an all-or-nothing maneuver, but in reality, it was an example of how Verstappen manages the limits without crossing them, even in extremely demanding conditions. Throughout the race, Max maintained a consistent pace that was key to consolidating the victory. He made no mistakes under pressure, not even when crosswinds in the Ravazza area caused oversteer that forced several drivers to ease off. Verstappen, on the other hand, reacted quickly, manually adjusting the differential from the steering wheel to control the loss of grip. These kinds of interventions, which go unnoticed by many spectators, are what truly make the difference between a good driver and an extraordinary one. The ability to adapt in real time to changing track conditions, without the need for instructions from the pit wall, demonstrates a deep connection between driver and machine. It's not just about pure speed, but also about sensitivity, mental management, and experience applied with surgical precision. Another aspect that cannot be overlooked is tire management. In the current era of Formula One, where thermal degradation can ruin an entire race, Verstappen demonstrated a masterful ability to preserve the performance of his compounds. At Imola, he managed to extend his first stint on medium tires until lap 27, when most of his rivals were beginning to lose pace between laps 22 and 24. This was no coincidence. Thanks to an accurate reading of the track conditions and a smoother driving style in the most punishing sections, Max avoided unnecessary wear without sacrificing speed. This allowed him to stay within a consistent competitive range, with average lap times of 1 minute and 18.5 seconds, regaining the advantage even in the sections where the McLaren was strongest. The redistribution of downforce toward the front axle, coupled with the softer rear suspension setting, certainly helped, but it was Verstappen himself who knew how to take advantage of this new setup without overexerting the package. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of his performance was the composure with which he handled the final laps. Despite Piastri's McLaren pushing hard in the slow corners, Verstappen never lost his composure. He maintained control in the sectors where the RB21 still showed weaknesses, especially in the Villeneuve and Tosa sequences, where he lost up to 0.2 per lap. But rather than entering into a direct war where the car gave him no advantage, he focused his strategy on maximizing the RB21's strengths on fast straights and corners. This strategic maturity, this selective approach that prioritizes where to defend and where to avoid wasting tires or energy, is part of the silent arsenal that Verstappen has been perfecting for seasons. Max's role in this victory wasn't that of a driver simply capitalizing on the good work of his team. It was that of a competitor pushing the machine to its maximum potential, turning technical improvements into concrete results, and, above all, remaining calm in high-tension situations. He didn't let anxiety, or the expectations that weighed on him, get the better of him. Instead, he built his victory lap by lap, with intelligence, instinct, and a total connection with the RB21. And in a season where the margins are so tight and the rivals so well prepared, that ability to execute perfectly is what could make the difference in the fight for the championship. But of course, an individual performance, however brilliant, must also be understood in the context of the overall battle. What Red Bull and Verstappen achieved at Imola has implications that go far beyond a single race. The improvements introduced to the RB21 during the Imola Grand Prix not only gave Red Bull temporary control over aerodynamic development, but also opened up a range of technical and strategic consequences that could define the course of the 2025 season. In this sport, no improvement is harmless. Every added part, every change in aerodynamic flow, every suspension adjustment generates a chain of effects that impact everything from on-track performance to the decisions made in internal team meetings. Therefore, it is essential to understand how these modifications not only affected the immediate result at Imola, but also how they are altering the dynamic between Red Bull, its main rivals, and Verstappen himself as a key figure in this ecosystem. In technical terms, one of the first visible consequences was the change in downforce distribution, which redirected part of the car's balance toward the front axle. This decision, originally intended to reduce rear tire degradation, had the side effect of altering the RB21's handling in slow corners. While the car displayed remarkable stability in high-speed corners, in the tighter sections of the circuit, such as the Villeneuve chicane or the Tosa braking zone, it became clear that the car was not yet fully balanced for all scenarios. The McLaren, for example, was shaving 0.2 of a second per lap in these areas, making it clear that Red Bull still has an area of tactical vulnerability that can be exploited by its rivals. In a championship as closely contested as the current one, where gaps are measured in thousandths of a second, these types of limitations can have a critical impact, especially on urban tracks or those with short radius corners like Monaco or Hungary. From a strategic perspective, the success of the upgrade package represents important validation for Red Bull's technical department, but it also creates renewed pressure. Now that they have proven capable of responding effectively and quickly to McLaren's evolution, the bar has been raised. It's not enough to simply remain competitive. Now, every race is expected to bring a new feature, an update, a small improvement that can make a difference. And this constant expectation entails an investment not only financially, but also operationally and humanly. The team must sustain a pace of development that is extremely difficult to maintain throughout the entire season without compromising the car's reliability or the coherence of the overall design. In this context, every decision counts. The timing of an update, the compatibility between the new parts and upcoming circuits, and even the management of internal component are all part of a chain of decisions that must be made with surgical precision. On the other hand, the consequences of this technical evolution also directly impact Max Verstappen, not only as a driver, but as a strategic linchpin of the Red Bull project. By showing that he can still take advantage even with a car that isn't dominant in all conditions, Verstappen reinforces his leadership position within the team. But at the same time, it also exposes the delicate balance the team is in. Because if the improvements hadn't worked, if the car hadn't performed as expected, we'd be talking about a completely different race, likely with a negative result and a very different atmosphere in the garage. This is no small feat, especially considering the recent rumors linking him to Ferrari and other teams willing to offer him a competitive and financially attractive environment. Every result counts not only in terms of points, but also in the level of confidence the driver places in his team and his future project. Finally, we can't ignore how this victory and these improvements impact the psychology of the championship. McLaren and Mercedes closely observed every change to the RB21 over the weekend at Imola. They knew Red Bull was bringing something different, but the level of effectiveness exceeded expectations. McLaren team principal Andrea Stella was clear in his assessment. There's no room for relaxation. Every tenth of a second gained by Red Bull represents a sign that the technological race is more alive than ever. For his part, Toto Wolff acknowledged that the RB21 no longer has the overwhelming advantage of 2024, but remains the benchmark thanks to Verstappen. This establishes a new paradigm of competition, where the pressure to innovate no longer comes solely from on-track performance, but from the fear of being left behind in a battle where every evolution counts as a statement of intent. Max Verstappen's victory at Imola was much more than a Imola Grand Prix. It was a strategic blow to the championship standings, have given Red Bull a significant boost, and a demonstration that it would be a mistake to think although no longer the challenges have been resolved, is still the team to beat. In fact, what looms on the immediate horizon is a new, even more complex scenario, where what was achieved at Imola will be put to the test in completely different conditions. The next challenge on the calendar is the Monaco Grand Prix, a circuit that has historically been a nightmare for any car that doesn't offer extreme agility, solid low-speed traction, and neutral handling in tight corners. These are precisely the areas where the RB21 still shows weaknesses that even its latest update hasn't been able to fully correct. Therefore, what happens in Monaco will not only determine whether Red Bull's improvements were a comprehensive solution or just a specific adaptation to Imola's characteristics, but will also serve as a real barometer to assess the car's degree of evolution in terms of versatility. And this is no trivial matter. Monaco is unforgiving. It's a circuit where the car's limitations are amplified, where the margin for error is non-existent, and where the driver needs not only talent but complete confidence in the chassis response. If the RB21 continues to struggle in low-speed corners, as partially seen in the Villeneuve-Tosa sequence at Imola, then Red Bull's engineers will urgently need to return to the drawing board. It's not enough to be strong in high-load sections or fast sectors. In such a closely contested championship, a car must be able to perform at its highest level in all conditions. And Monaco, more than a technical challenge, will be a precise snapshot of how much room for improvement this RB21 has left and how quickly Red Bull can respond in terms of development when faced with circuits with extreme characteristics. Furthermore, beyond the technical demands, the timing of the upcoming races poses new logistical and strategic challenges. After Monaco, there will be mixed-type circuits like Barcelona, where tire degradation and efficiency in long corners are once again key, and then tracks like Canada or Austria, where traction on the exit from slow corners and stability under braking will determine overall performance. This forces teams, and especially Red Bull, to find a fine balance between continuing to evolve the car without losing reliability or compromising the integration of each update. Because each improvement introduced comes at a technical cost, and if not properly tested before implementation, it can generate inconsistencies in the car's behavior that end up affecting not only qualifying but also the entire race management. From Verstappen's perspective, the landscape is also full of decisions that could change the course of a season. His victory at Imola reaffirms his leadership and demonstrates that he remains the central pillar on which Red Bull's competitive performance rests. However, talk of his possible departure from the team has not entirely dissipated. There's a quiet tension in the paddock, a constant expectation of whether Max will decide to renew his long-term commitment or seek new horizons with teams that could offer him a different environment, perhaps more stable or with a technical project with greater future potential. For now, his focus is on performance and the fight for the championship, but no one ignores that his decisions at the end of the season could trigger a complete reconfiguration of the grid's balance. Hence, every race, every victory, every technical step taken by Red Bull is also loaded with a strategic subtext, that of convincing their star driver that the most competitive future still lies with them. In this scenario, the pressure no longer comes solely from the stopwatch, but also from the narrative that is built week after week in the media, in technical briefings, and in rival analyses. McLaren won't give in. Mercedes, despite not yet being in the direct fight for victories, continues to develop its car with the hope of reaching the final third of the championship in top form. And teams like Aston Martin and Ferrari, although somewhat behind at this point, are waiting to capitalize on any mistakes or delays in Red Bull's development. Therefore, the path forward for Verstappen and his team is not one of celebration, but of total focus. Imola was a key victory, but now begins a stage of the championship where each circuit represents a different threat. Every mistake is amplified, and every improvement must be validated in much more varied conditions than those seen so far. Ultimately, what's expected for the near future is an even closer battle, where dominance won't be absolute, and where the team's room for maneuver will be reduced to decisions calculated to the millimeter. Red Bull has taken an important step by regaining some of the technical advantage that seemed to be fading, but the question remains whether they can sustain that level in future events. And, even more importantly, whether they can continue building a car that's not only fast, but also flexible, adaptable, and reliable in all possible conditions. Because at the end of the day, championships aren't won with good performances alone. They're won with consistency, quick responses, and the ability to anticipate what's coming. And what lies ahead, for Verstappen and Red Bull, is a highly demanding terrain where not only their technical performance will be tested, but also their mettle as an elite project in Formula One.